How's everyone doing tonight? And welcome to my channel. This is for educational purposes, and we try to highlight great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, and also things like magnum opuses and tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries, both ancient and modern, and generally from obscure sources, things that you probably haven't heard of or don't know much about, but if you did, they would revolutionize your life. And so we've taken a look at the ancient Egyptian tree of life, about 300 videos worth, and almost 600 videos on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. The greatest, in my opinion, certainly greatest modern theory of everything out there, where he unites all the different major fields of science, and he also unites science with religion. And so we are, in honor of the reciprocal system, we are putting together a series of videos. This is the 264th video that we've done called the Reciprocal Church, where we're trying to amass all kinds of different theories from people who spent their whole life working on this stuff. Never got credit, never got money, but did it because they believed in it. And came close to hitting a home run. Maybe not an out of the park home run, but definitely got on base and scored a run or something. But their theories are generally in jeopardy of falling onto the ash heap of history, and we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And by spreading their word, hopefully, you'll spread it as well once you see how important it is. And so in this reciprocal church, we've looked at, entheogens, or we're going to look at a little bit more at entheogens, also sacred geometry and sacred mathematics. We're going to definitely get into some Temple of Man eventually, by Schwaller de Lubitz. And we're also looked at ecstatic music, probably even more look at some shamanic drumming, and definitely music theory. And we've looked at intense endurance training to get into that second wind, or the peace inside the pain, or the runner's high, or whatever you want to call it. And also very deep forms of meditation that will take you into exotic states of consciousness that are mapped out. And so you can kind of understand where you're going, where you've been, and how you got there. And we have done a series of videos trying to demonstrate why this is really necessary. Why do we need to be putting together all of these spiritual resources? Why are we focused on trying to, use these things in our own life to put together a spiritual practice on our own? Well, it's because all of the Western religions have died, and they all are about to fall apart completely. The evidence just isn't there for them. And, probably won't happen tomorrow, but, over the course of time, the lack of evidence and just the greater amount of evidence against these things is going to start to add up. When I say the Western religions, I'm really talking about 5 religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and atheism, otherwise known as scientism. All of these have been discredited, and some more than others. and we just haven't really learned about it. So we're learning about the Christianity part, which is um, there's probably the most evidence, um, but I would say of all those five religions, Christianity is the best one. But nonetheless, I see it as a limited hangout. It's got some good aspects to it. Some things that, especially if you're just like reading it a few verses at a time and just citing one verse at a time, yeah, there's plenty of stuff in it that you can be inspired by and that you can almost even live your life by. But when you look at it as a totality, it's false because it's very obvious that it was written by the Romans. The entire New Testament was written by the Romans. The Romans were the only people that were even capable of writing the New Testament. In the first century, nobody was writing anything but the Romans. The Romans had a monopoly on writing, especially writing in Greek. They had a monopoly on publishing, and they had a monopoly on distributing. And with the numbers of these gospels that were coming out in the first and second century, there was nobody that was capable of doing that other than the Romans. The Romans also had a huge motive to do this because they had been fighting the Jews in various wars and revolutions and insurrections for over 100 years, leading up to the final war of the Jews from 66 to 73 AD, where the Romans finally went in and destroyed the temple at Jerusalem, and then killed like 1 million Jews, at least according to this guy Josephus, who we'll definitely talk about here. And so the Romans had a clear motive to try to mellow out the Jews. There were hundreds of different people living in the Roman Empire at this time that they had to overcome. And they overcame them by basically getting them all to assimilate to the Roman customs and being flexible, letting their religion in as long as they kind of let your religion in, let the Roman religion in. And the Jews were not like that. The Jews would not assimilate. The Jews believed in separatism. The Jews had their own monotheistic God they were the chosen people by that God. And so they didn't want to mix with you. And they also had all of these different laws and strictures that they believed in against graven images, all of the 10 Commandments, the kosher food laws, the animal sacrifices, the Passover and stuff, and the circumcision. And so the Romans were sick of it. And so they decided to go with the psychological warfare. And they proposed a Jewish hero and leader and Messiah who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression, who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, who styled himself as a Prince of Peace and even was willing to walk an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack on his back, and to praise the Roman slave owner for having the greatest faith in all of Judea. And so they put that out, and it had been a long time coming. There was a committee to form a new Roman religion formed way back in Tiberius's time. That was really at the time of so-called Jesus. But it never really came to fruition until the reign of Emperor Vespasian, 69 to 79 AD. He was the first of the Flavian emperors. That was Vespasian, his two sons, Titus and Domitian, 69 to 96 AD. They set the story of Jesus back by 40 years. And then, under their auspices, they wrote a book called, a 7-volume book called Wars of the Jews. about the history of this Jewish war. And it was written under the name of Josephus. Now, if you read Josephus's autobiography, he claims to have been a Jewish general who surrendered to Vespasian, then defected to the Romans, and eventually was bailed out by Vespasian because he predicted that Vespasian would one day become emperor. And when he did, because Vespasian was just the general at this time, and when he did become emperor, he pardoned Josephus, brought him to Rome, and hired him as the court historian, and adopted him as a member of his family. So Josephus's name is Flavius Josephus. He is one of the Flavians. So when you recognize that Josephus was a Roman, or effectively a Roman, he wrote War of the Jews, or whoever Josephus was, whether that was a real story, which is very dubious, or not. He wrote, whoever Josephus was, wrote Wars of the Jews, and the two books, the Gospels and Wars of the Jews, parallel each other over and over and over again. It's like they're having a conversation with each other at points. And they bounce off each other. They parody each other. They make riddles together. They answer each other. A lot of times what Jesus predicts is going to happen in the Gospels is his predictions are fulfilled by Titus in the Wars of the Jews. Titus, the son of Vespasian, the general after Vespasian became emperor. Titus eventually became emperor after his father died. And so Titus is really the second coming of Jesus, because the prophecies, especially the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem, that we are all waiting for, who are paying attention to the Revelation, it's already happened. It happened in the first century, in 70s AD, and the second coming was Titus Caesar. So that already puts you into one bind or double bind, and not to mention the fact that many of these prophecies, the location where they occur is the exact same location where Titus fulfills the prophecy. And the date that the prophecy occurs is exactly 40 years from the date that Titus, many times down to the very day, and even the very hour, is fulfilled by Titus. But you can't say that the Gospels were written first and then Josephus just was piggybacking off the Gospels, because in many cases the Gospels are actually parodying Josephus. They were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason. And we're looking at an author who has a new book here today who tries to prove that. And this book is called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult, and is by Michael Menescotz, Menasgotz, and it just came out 6 months ago or so. And what Menescotz does is he gets a piece of graph paper, and he puts the book of Luke from the Gospels on the vertical axis. Chapters 1 through 24, 1 at the bottom, 24 at the top. And then on the horizontal axis, he takes Wars of the Jews, 694 paragraphs, 1 at the left, 694 at the right. And then when he finds a parallel between the two, he plots the point or points that are appropriate. He found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. That's over 10 per chapter. So it's not really like a coincidence. You can dismiss a couple of them as being coincidental. You probably dismiss 20 of them as being coincidental. But some of them are way too thick, way too detailed, way too specific, and way too hidden to actually dismiss them once you see it. Because sometimes it's really hard to see them, but then when you evaluate the two paragraphs, it's like, wow, there were like 8 parallels there in just one paragraph. Um, okay, so we're going to go over some of the parallels that he puts up there. Now, the thumbnail for the video is his map. So what it happens when he plots all those points is it makes 5 Latin letters, APTVS, which I think stands for Arius Piso Titus Vespasianus. But it obviously could be something else. But I think the main point is that the Romans actually signed their name to the book of Luke, which I think is pretty solid proof. You know, any of you Q followers out there, you know, how much before it's no longer, you know, a coincidence, you know, before it's mathematically, you know, it's you know, where the chances are so low that this could be a coincidence that you have to give it some credit as being intentional. Okay, so we're going to start with this next parallel, and it's first coming from Jewish Wars, paragraph 690 and 692. So right at the end, all the way to the right-hand side of the chart. Jonathan, who was also known as John, Jonathan was one of the Jewish leaders of the resistance in this war. It was Jonathan, Simon, and Eleazar, or Lazarus. Interesting that they all have biblical, you know, names corresponding to biblical characters. But so Jonathan was one of the leaders of the Jews. Jonathan led them into the desert, promising signs, and fled. But they searched for him all over the country. He was at last taken. And then skipping a paragraph, he says, Catullus came to Rome with Jonathan in bonds, expecting no further inquisition into his lies. Vespasian, who was the emperor, Vespasian first tormented Jonathan and then burnt him alive. Okay, now he's crossing this with Luke chapter 4. Well, he's using three different verses from Luke here. Luke chapter 4, verse 42. Jesus went into a desert place, and the people sought him and came to him and stayed him, that he should not depart from them. Now, backing up to Luke 3, verse 2. The word of God came to John of Zacharias in the wilderness, who came about Jordan, preaching the baptism, saying, one crying in the wilderness. And then up to Luke 8, verse 28. When he's referring to a man who lived in the tombs. I think this is the what's he called? The maniac. What I can't remember what he's called, but he's the he needs a exorcism. I can't think of any of these words. Okay, when this guy, the maniac, saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down and said, I beseech you, torment me not. And he was kept bound with chains and in fetters. And he broke the bands and was driven of the devil into the wilderness. Okay, So let's look at his analysis here. Again, these are parallels the author arranged to place dots, stars on the chart in the desired places, here to form the S in APTVS. Okay, so he's basically saying this is kind of a weaker parallel. There are many where they're just trying to fill out the pattern. You know, they're trying to create parallels just so that they can put a dot there. There's some other parallels that are just very strong, which are probably kind of the core ones. But then there are also these peripheral ones that are just there so that they can put a dot. So that's kind of what he's saying, I think, there. However, to see the relevance of Luke 8:28 requires understanding that John is being equated with Satan, as we will show later, in his fiery pit. So John being burned by Vespasian is equivalent to Jesus tormenting the one who lives in the tombs. Not quite getting that. Okay, and that's all he has to say. So going to the next parallel. Next up is the parallel that offers the strongest many-to-one connections, i.e. one location in Luke matches 9 locations in Jewish war. If there was an intention for a group of parallels to be revealed first, to form an outline of the APTVS pattern prior to filling in the details, this one is certainly in that group. Okay, so first we're going to go over all of the paragraphs from Jewish War by Josephus, and then we'll go through the one from Luke. So what did he say? There were 9 of them. 9 different paragraphs from Josephus matched up with just one from Luke. Okay, Jewish War 42, Book 1, Chapter 7, Paragraph 4. When the temple, and parenthetic or whatever, importantly, you can, for free, download a copy of Josephus's Wars of the Jews in a PDF form from the internet. And so you can do these exercises yourself. If you doubt me, or if you think that he's making it up, or whatever, you can do this yourself. That's the whole idea. That's why I think it's a powerful proof, is because you can prove it to yourself. You don't have to kind of rely on an expert opinion or something like that. Now, there are some technicalities. You know, this is an English translation. The translation is by Whiston, primarily. That's the one I know of anyway. There's a Slavonic version. The original version of Wars of the Jews is in Greek, even though Josephus says that it was in the father tongue, which some people take to be Chaldean or Chaldee. But the version that's come down to us is in Greek, which is the same as the Gospels, which that version is in Greek. The fact that the Gospels is in Greek should be a huge red flag for its legitimacy already. Okay, Jewish War 42. When the temple was taken, the Jews were, quote, every day slain about the altar of the temple of Jerusalem. Jewish War 86, Book 1, Chapter 13, verse 2, or paragraph 2. There was a battle in the marketplace, the outer court of the temple, in which Herod's party shut the enemy up in the temple and set 60 men in the next room to guard to them. But the people came in and burnt those men. So there was bloodshed in the temple of Jerusalem. Jewish War 123, Book 1, Chapter 18, paragraph 2. Herod's party then killed them mercilessly all about Jerusalem, including killing those who ran to the temple through the marketplace. Jewish War 235, Book 2, Chapter 3, paragraph 3. The Romans set fire to the cloisters of the Holy Temple, leading some of those within the temple who the fire prevented from escaping to take their own lives with their swords. Jewish War 534, Book 5, Chapter 1, Paragraph 3. With such force the darts reached the altar. The priests fell down before their sacrifices and sprinkled that altar with their own blood. Jewish War 543, Book 5, Chapter 3, Paragraph 1. John sent his men in, and the people that stood trembling at the altar and about the holy house were beaten with weapons, and many died. Jewish War 625, Book 6, Chapter 4, Paragraph 6. Titus's men killed, leaving them dead at the altar, the steps running with blood. Jewish War 645, Book 6, Chapter 9, Paragraph 2. Caesar killed the useless and old Jews and had the rest herded into the temple, where Fronto then slaughtered in the temple those who had been seditious and robbers. And finally, Jewish War 356, Book 2. I don't know why he switches the order here, but Book 2, Chapter 21, Paragraph 3. Josephus, so he's writing about himself. So he's putting himself into the story, because he does claim that he was the general for the Jews in this war before he defected to the Romans. So he calls himself by his first name, Josephus. Josephus invites a man into the most secluded room of his house, evoking the sanctum of the holy house, is the parenthetical comment, and has him flayed such as to expose his bones and leave him covered in blood. And he says in parentheses, this discussion of Josephus' struggle with John is part of a wider parody of Jesus' life, involving a man flayed to the bone in an inner room mirroring the ones above. But now we go to the book of Luke, and it's just one passage, or at least one chapter from Luke, chapter 11. And he's got verses 50, 51, and 43. So they all really would be plotted there at the 11. And so the 11 is making 9 separate dots all across the pattern of the APTVS. Let's see if they are deserving. Luke 11, chapter 11, verse 50. Zacharias is he whom ye slew between the temple and the altar of Jerusalem. 51. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zacharias, which perished between the altar and the temple of Jerusalem. And then we're back to verse 43 in chapter 11. Woe for you Pharisees, who love greetings in the marketplaces, including the temple outer court where animals were sold, and the uppermost seats in the synagogues. Okay, let's hear his explanation. In the parallels above, notice how many times Jewish war describes men being killed before that specific most holy altar, right where the Jewish God was believed to physically reside. This is implausible, since the Jews universally treated this holiest of holy altar as utterly sacrosanct. The fact that each of them occurs at a location in Jewish war that perfectly matches the APTVS pattern tell us that these events are fictions constructed to construct that APTVS pattern. We can also see a secondary objective here of, as usual, denigrating the holiness of the Jewish sacred temple and indeed Jewish morality. Okay, well, that's not very satisfying, but one thing I do want to point out that he mentions, and just for context, We have to remember Josephus is seen these days now by modern scholars as being one of the great historians ever, okay, especially of antiquity, maybe the greatest historian of antiquity. And to see just kind of like outright lies in Josephus, I mean, not only does this this analysis destroy the New Testament, in particular the Gospels, but it also destroys Josephus's credibility as a historian. So that kind of leaves us hanging pretty badly, because Josephus is kind of like the only source that we have for first century, particularly first century Judea, and even really to a certain extent Roman history. Between the Gospels and Josephus, that beside that, there's not really that much that we have to go on. So when you kind of throw a wrench into both of them, you're not left with much as far as the first century goes, especially in Judea. The only thing that you really have now is the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were not discovered, so-called discovered, until the mid to late 1940s. Okay, so we went, and that really almost puts a question mark on the Dead Sea Scrolls, too, because it's like they're kind of like filling a vacuum. It's like that's very fortuitous that the Dead Sea Scrolls happen to appear, just before or even after some authors, because Metascotts is certainly not the first author to have this Roman origins hypothesis. In the modern era, it goes back to Bruno Bauer in 1875, James Ballantyne Hannay, and Sir Ronald Syme in the early 20th century at Oxford. Bruno Bauer was at Berlin, University of Berlin. So these are like high-powered, academics. And then, later we've had Abelard Reuchlin in the late 70s, Roman Piso shortly thereafter, up until the present day, writing mostly articles. He wrote a lot of books, but they were kind of like destroyed. And Joseph Atwill, Caesar's Messiah and Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, Henry Davis, Creating Christianity, and there's probably somebody else I'm forgetting. James Valiant dabbles in this. And so Metascotts is not the first person to come up with this, but, there's nothing